Bob Gibbons, class of 1965, lives outside of San Diego. Oceanside? Oceanside, San Diego. I met Bob for the first time, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago on a trip out there. His daughter was here when I was here. She was 92, I was 90. And of course, every time I go out there since, I've met up with him, and he's usually wants to take me to Senior Frogs, which is fantastic, good choice. And Bob wrote a couple books about his time and his experiences with the University of Notre Dame, where he attended. Great. And he sent me copies. I read them. These are good books. I'm a Notre Dame fan. Then he wrote a great book called Growing Up on Oriole Street, which is down the street. So I'm from the neighborhood, so I read it. I'm like, this is a really good book. An entire chapter was dedicated to his time at Aquinas. Very cool. One day he calls me and says, I'm thinking about writing a book about Aquinas. I said, okay. What do you think? I was like, well, as long as you do it and I don't, that's great. My English teachers wouldn't let me. And I knew he was a great writer and does great research. Well, fantastic as Bob is, I'm like, this is a heavy lift. We're talking over 100 years of history. We're talking 100 years just on Dewey Avenue, let alone before that. So I I think the Postal Service loves us. So I sent them every yearbook we ever had, pretty much, and a lot of stuff. And with the help of Miss Whalen, we sent him a lot of information. And then I got to start talking to people. So if you're in this room and like Ron Mack got a couple calls, and he called a lot of people. And then every couple of weeks I'd get a call from Bob, and we'd go down a rabbit hole. Oh, did you know in 1922 this? I'm like, 1920? I was born in 1971, Bob. No, I didn't know that. But I was absolutely amazed and enthralled by the depths this book goes. I've absolutely been blessed to see it before it went to the publisher, and I will tell you this. If you think you know the history of Aquinas, you're in for a very pleasant surprise. This book is absolutely amazing. The one negative piece I will say is you might not be in it. He could probably have written a book, 400 pages, which is basically what this book is, every year of Aquinas history. So I think not the accomplishment is what he put in this book, what he had the restraint not to put in, because it was a labor of love. He sends the thing. We look at it. Okay, should go yet? No, and he kept wanting to add stuff. I think I want to add this. I'm like, no, we got to get to print. Do yourself a favor. Purchase the book. You can buy it after here. I'm sure he'll sign it for you. The proceeds he demanded go to Aquinas. So I thank you for that, Bob. It's obviously this is a labor of love. That will continue to give after this speech. So with no further ado, Bob has offered to spend some time talking about the research of this book and then open it up to questions as well. So ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bob Gibbons.
Thanks, Jay. One of the things you should remember about this is nobody writes a book alone, right? Not other books you've read and not this book. There are so many people, and Jay talked a little bit about a few of them. Ron Mack, who's here, one of the great coaches in Aquinas history, he and I spent a lot of time on the telephone. He told me stories. Margaret Whalen, to just lapse for my only four-letter word in this entire presentation, Margaret gets shit done. Okay, I mean, she always has. Okay, and because I knew if I needed something and I got a message to Margaret by Monday night, by Wednesday at the very latest, I would have the information I needed. So Margaret got some bizarre questions answered, and I sure want to thank her for that. And there are others. Kathy Lynn, for example, who cast the deciding vote to help Aquinas go co-ed. She's one of my heroes. Father Cyril Carter. If any of you, whenever you were here, you knew Father Carter. Short, little, unassuming, humble priest, unbelievable influence on this school. So the point is, huh? What kind of cigarette? Oh, that's right. Yeah, always an unfiltered cigarette, kind of next to his ear, hanging from his mouth. But man, there's stories about Father Carter in this book that I hope just increase your appreciation for him. But I thought I would spend just a few minutes this morning. It might seem longer to you, but a few minutes talking a little bit about beginning with sort of why I wrote this book. And I think I really wrote it for for sort of two reasons. The first is we have a school here that has stood for more than 100 years, a Catholic school, a Catholic high school that has stood for more than 100 years in this location and another 22 years or so before coming to Dewey Avenue. It's an amazing achievement. Somebody just, I thought, had to tell this story. And there were no other volunteers. So why not me, right? So first thing is we had a story that deserved to be told. The second thing is, you know, and some of you who are good friends here, Pamela Young, for example, a good friend from Kodak, have heard me say this before, but you know, as we go through life, there are a lot of people who help us and a lot of experiences help us get what we've got. But there are only a very few who help us become who we are. Okay? And Aquinas was one of those experiences for me. Okay? And so if you know those people, by the way, you need to thank them. Okay? And you need to thank them in however you can, you know. In this case, this book is in some ways kind of payback for me. Okay? It's kind of my thanks to Aquinas for what they did for me. They took a blue-collar kid out of this neighborhood, grew up over on Oriole Street, and gave me, you know, a great life. Gave me a start on a great life. I went to Notre Dame and so forth, and we don't need to talk about that. But anyway, that was a great school, great experience for me. What I decided, and Jay alluded to this a little bit, and I just want you to know this, is that I told Jay, I told Ted, and I told Dave Eustace that what I would do is I would write the book. My contribution would be I'd write the book, I'd get it laid out and designed, and you know, I'll get ready for a publisher, and then all the money that the book made would go to Aquinas. So so when you're buying the book, if you decide to buy the book, it's up to you. Know that you're not donating to the Bob Gibbons Memorial Fund. You're donating to Aquinas. Okay, so this is your donation to Aquinas. I've made an arrangement sort of like that once before in my life. When Jeannie and I got married, I told Jeannie, I said, when it comes to money, why don't we kind of split up the responsibilities? I'll try to make it, and you try to figure out ways to spend it. And she said, you know, I think I can live with that arrangement. So, you know, we've been married. I mean, so far so good. We've been married 55 years as of last July. You know, and you know, it's interesting. We live in California, as Jay said. But you know, when I tell people in Rochester we've been married 55 years, they mostly say things like "congratulations," right? In California, when you tell people we've been married 55 years, they mostly say things like, you guys should get out more, you know? But I'm a storyteller. I'm going to tell you a few stories today. When it came to trying to figure out, you know, how do you take 100 years of history and compress it into 400 pages or 4,000 pages or 4 million pages? How do you take that? I think in my case, I started out with sort of deciding that I'm going to focus on two sort of tracks, as it were. I'm going to try to talk about the enduring traditions of Aquinas, sort of the sports, right? Especially basketball and football that have been here the longest, but other sports also. And Ron Mack was enormously helpful doing those, coming up with some of those stories. So music, drama, the enduring traditions of the school. And then I was going to focus on the ordinary days. You know, what was it like to be an Aquinas student during the 30s? What was it like in the 40s when they had so many students they had to start an annex over on LaGrange Avenue? You know, what were those days like? What was on kids' minds? What were they talking about? What were they doing? And so, you know, I called Jay and I said, you know what I need? I need the yearbooks. And he said, which yearbooks? I said, all the yearbooks, okay? I have a ton of yearbooks in my garage right now. In fact, my wife said, how long are we going to need to keep those, right? Anyway, so the idea was to focus on sort of the enduring traditions in the ordinary days. So that's what you'll see woven through the book. So, you know, those traditions and ordinary days gave me the opportunity to also talk about other things, to talk about the priests that were here. And by the way, there is a name of every single Basilian who ever served here throughout the entire history. The years they served, whether they were a priest or they were a novitiate or scholastic or whatever you call priests who are going to be priests who weren't yet priests. But anyway, because I worked with the Basilian, Michelle Sawyer, who's the archivist for the Basilians in Toronto, who provided all those names, all those years, all the background, all the obituaries. You know, the neat thing about Catholics is we got a ton of information, don't we? I mean, we're really good at keeping old information, which was really helpful for me. And then, as I say, the ordinary days, you know, came from the yearbooks. So how did I do the research? Well, I did the research obviously from the yearbooks. I did the research from talking to people. I did the research by going online. There's a little website called newspapers.com. Maybe some of you have used it. That you know, kind of has all of the stories through all of the years. Back in the first 20 years of the 20th century, about 1900 to 1920, as Aquinas was kind of getting started, there were 6 major newspapers in the Rochester area. Obviously the Democrat and Chronicle, but there was a Post Express, and there were other things. And those 6 major newspapers ended up writing 4,800 articles about Aquinas. Now, a lot of them were about sports, but they were about other things too. So anyway, so I did research online and so forth. So anyway, if you think Gibbons made this crap up, right? No, Gibbons didn't make this crap up. Okay, this stuff is real. Let me just tell you a couple of stories. I don't know. You guys want to hear some stories, or you want to just ask questions, or what do you want to do? So one of the other things I wanted to talk about is, why did I call it Becoming Aquinas, right? So I played with a lot of titles, right? And I played with titles that included legacy and tradition and spirit and landmark and other sort of key words in sort of the Aquinas lexicon. But I finally decided that, you know what? A school is an organic entity. A school is something that needs, a good school, needs to always be in the process of evolving, of changing, of becoming, okay? Not only is this a history of how this school got to this point in time, but what it's becoming for the future. So Aquinas, to me, is an organic entity, always in the process of becoming. That's why it's called Becoming Aquinas. Jay also said, by the way, that I just didn't want to forget this, that I would autograph your book, and I'd be happy to do that, but it will limit its value at a garage sale, I've been told. So you know, you might want to keep that in mind before you ask for a thing. So anyway, so let's you know, let's talk a little bit about some stories. Aquinas, how did Aquinas get started? Well, so there was this bishop. His name was Bishop McQuaid. He was the first bishop of Rochester back in the 1860s, and Bishop McQuaid was a huge believer in Catholic schools, especially Catholic grammar schools. You know, so every parish had to have a Catholic grammar school. And he really, really, really wanted Catholic high schools. And the reason he wanted Catholic high schools is because there was one public high school in Rochester at the time called the Rochester Free Academy. You can go down on South Fitchett Street, and there's a picture in the book of the building that stands there now, but it's in the same location. That's where Rochester Free Academy was. And back in those days, and then Rochester Free Academy split into 2 public high schools, East High School and West High School, and why were they called East and West? Because at that time the feeling was that high schools in Rochester should be named after points of the compass, right? So there should be an East and a West, and maybe someday a North and a South. And junior high schools should be named after other statesmen. So that's why you had John Marshall and Thomas Jefferson and, you know, whatever. And anyway, that obviously changed. But so Bishop McQuaid is thinking, oh man, we need a Catholic high school. No problem starting Catholic high schools for women, by the way, because Nazareth got started in the late 1800s. But then he had this cathedral school. He was obviously the Bishop of Rochester, and so his center was St. Patrick's Cathedral, which is downtown Rochester at the time. And so along comes this nun. Oh, the other thing is that I'm going to jump around here, but I'm in sort of the butter knife era, right, where I'm just so the bishop believed also that, insofar as Catholic schools were concerned, is that the Catholic schools would all be better if he were in charge, okay? And the way he could be in charge is by having fewer orders of nuns. Especially what he really wanted was one order of nuns who reported to him. Okay. Now some orders of nuns, reported elsewhere, reported to the Pope or whatever. But it turned out in the charter of the Sisters of St. Joseph, their charter said that they reported to the local bishop. He said, "They're my sisters," right? So anyway, so he brought them in, and so now we're in 1902, and the Sisters of St. Joseph are teaching in St. Patrick's School, St. Patrick's Grammar School, parochial school, whatever it was called at the time. And there's this one young nun, one sister. Oh, by the way, I'm gonna go back and forth. I'm gonna call them nuns and sisters. That is absolutely. I've been told that's absolutely wrong. Okay, I work with a woman whose name is Kathy Urbanic, great lady, who's the archivist for the Sisters of St. Joseph and the Mother House over on French Road. And Kathy told me that nuns are cloistered, and sisters are the ones who work out in the community. So if there's the Sisters of Mercy, the Sisters of St. Joseph, don't ever call them a nun. Sometimes I will. Okay, so I apologize for that. Anyway, so along comes this young sister. Her name is Sister Aquilina, because sisters had really interesting names back in those days. Sister Prudentia, Sister Aquilina. Anyway, so there's this young nun who's teaching in St. Patrick's Grammar School, who owns a typewriter. Okay. And not only does she own a typewriter, she knows how to type, and she knows how to teach people to type. And so she starts a typing class. Now, why did she start a typing class? Well, because, at that time, there's like a ton of companies that are getting started in the Rochester area, manufacturing companies, okay? And they need people who have, quote, bookkeeping skills or commercial skills or, understand that, so, including typing. And so, anyway, I'll tell you a typing story later. But anyway, so this sister decides with her one typewriter, she's going to start a typing class. Well, anyway, that typing class becomes hugely popular among 8th graders. And she says, you know what? I think what I'll do is for kids who want to kind of go on, I'll offer it next year. After they graduate from grammar school, they can take it as kind of like, let's call them freshmen today, but they can take it. So anyway, within a couple of years, another teacher joins her, Sister Prudentia, who has some bookkeeping skills. And, so pretty soon they get this whole sort of commercial thing going. And then somebody says, but we need an academic side of things, because the Rochester Free Academy, which is now turning into East and West High School, they teach academic things too. They teach languages and stuff like that. So boom, in comes more of that. So within the next couple of years, what started out as Cathedral Business School becomes Cathedral High School. Okay, and then what happens is the other parishes say, well, this is really pretty cool. We need to send our kids there. So now it's not really a cathedral high school, which is named after the parish, because other parishes are starting. So now it's Rochester Catholic High School. So same school, evolving, changing its name. Okay. In comes a guy by the name of Bishop Hickey. Bishop Hickey says, we got Nazareth over here. And by the way, this is at the time, Rochester Catholic High School is a co-ed high school. Bishop McQuaid, who passed away in 1913, I think. Anyway, Bishop McQuaid really wanted to get a Catholic school for boys going. He just couldn't get any interest. In fact, what he did is this first selection, this is stories in the book. These stories are all in the book, by the way. Maybe I'm just ruining your reading. Yeah, don't let me reveal the plot. Anyway, what? So anyway, Bishop McQuaid wanted to start a school for boys. So guess what? He picked out a piece of land to put that school on, and the piece of land turned out to be Maplewood Park today, by the way, so very close to Aquinas. Okay, and then he invited an order of priests to run the school, the Jesuits. Okay, the Jesuits turned him down. They had no interest in doing that. Okay, so he thought, so he's nice. The only thing he's got is this co-ed school, whatever. And now Bishop Hickey comes in, and Bishop Hickey really believes in education, and he says, all right, well, so he said, we've got this school called Nazareth for girls. Okay, now Nazareth is not yet on Lake Avenue; they're still downtown. And he said, we got school for girls. And he said, what we need to do is we need a more distinctive name for the school that he hoped would be boys. Because in 1916, when Nazareth moved from downtown to Lake Avenue, where they were for a long period of time, when Nazareth moved, what happened is the girls left the Rochester Catholic High School in 1916 and moved to Nazareth. So by process of attrition, he had a boys' school, right? The only reason he had a boys' school is because the girls left, all right? So Bishop Hickey said, we need a more distinctive name for this boys' school. We've got Nazareth, and we've got Rochester Catholic High School. We need a more distinctive name. Well, here's where there's several coincidences in Rochester history. Okay, here's a coincidence. Bishop Hickey's first name was Thomas, okay? Bishop Hickey's patron saint was St. Thomas Aquinas. He said, we need a more distinctive name. What a surprise that St. Thomas Aquinas was picked, right? So in 1917, the name St. Thomas Aquinas was picked for this school, and it became Aquinas. Anyway, I'm just jumping around here. So how did it get to Dewey Avenue? Let's just talk briefly about how it got to Dewey Avenue. So anyway, it was outgrowing its facility. It was part of a grammar school operation in downtown Rochester. It was getting bigger and bigger, getting more and more popular. And so the bishop said, you know what we need another location for this. So I think what I need to do is I need to raise some money to pay for a new building. Okay. By the way, the nuns owned this land. That the Sisters of St. Joseph are good business people, by the way. They owned a lot of crap, or a lot of stuff in Rochester. And so anyway, so they owned this land. So Bishop Hickey said, hey, here's a piece of land. We can use this piece of land. It's north of the city. It has room for expansion and, clean air and so forth, and good transportation. And so we'll get this piece of land. But we got to build a school, and we got to raise some money to build a school. And Bishop Hickey thought that this school would cost $650,000, okay? Now, this is 1923, okay? The average wage in Rochester in 1923, 65 cents an hour, okay? It's 1 million hours he was asking people to give in 1923, right? I mean, but Bishop Hickey... He knew how to run a campaign. So they ran this campaign, and there's stories in the campaign that will break your heart. Stories behind the campaign that will break your heart. But he ran this campaign, and within a couple of weeks, they raised over $900,000 to build this school. Okay? So isn't it amazing? I mean, in that era, right? Yeah, incredible. And so, so he gets the school started, and and that was 1925, and then so now it's a diocesan school. It's running along, and Bishop Hickey passes away, and in comes actually the fourth bishop of Rochester. There was a Bishop O'Hearn in between who passed away really quickly. But anyway, Bishop Mooney comes in. Maybe you heard the name Mooney. Bishop Mooney comes in. I tell you two stories about Bishop Mooney, just because he's one of my heroes. A really impressive guy, right? So Bishop Mooney is a young priest in Ohio in the 1920s, right? And growing up, and so Bishop Mooney is part of a parish in Ohio before he comes to Rochester, before he becomes a bishop. You know, Father Mooney. Father Mooney is in Ohio, and Father Mooney's parish that he's in needs to raise some money for a building. So what they did back then is they would hold a rally. They had a big rally in a field at night, and you know they'd cook hot dogs, and well, maybe not hot dogs, but they cook some stuff, and they'd get everybody together, get them whipped into a frenzy, and they donate money, right? So anyway, so they have this rally in a field in Ohio at night, and it turns out that at the same time, 2 fields away, the Ku Klux Klan is having a rally. Okay, now those of you who know the Ku Klux Klan know that they like to light up crosses, and they weren't necessarily friendly. And anyway, so Bishop Mooney does he gives a speech, and you know his great speech. Father Mooney, his name is, and gives a great speech, and he raises $12,000, right, at that night. A lot of money, $12,000 for this parish. Okay, and then after he finishes his speech, he said, "Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over there to the Ku Klux Klan." He said, "I'm going to talk to those guys." "You're going to do what?" And he said, "No, I'm going to go over. I'm going to talk to those guys." So he goes over there, and somehow he convinces the great Klan leader, or whatever, to let him speak, and he does. He speaks, and he says to the group, he says, "Well, first of all," he says, "let me thank you for lighting up the night." He said, because, he says, we're holding a little rally over there. He said, brought a lot of light to our rally. And he said, and he said, the other thing is, he says, our rally was very successful. We're kind of wrapping it up now. He says, we're going to do a little cake and ice cream. He said, we'd love to have some of you come over, join us. Right? Not only did members of the Ku Klux Klan come over and join him, he raised another $2,000, okay? So he was quite the convincing orator, right? So anyway, so the story of Bishop Mooney's in there. I tell you one other story about Mooney, so he was the one who brought the Basilians in, right? So now it's 1936, and Aquinas, despite the fact that they'd raised all this money and stuff like that, they've got costs and maintenance, and Dave Eustace can tell you, and Ted can tell you what the costs keep going up. What are you going to do? So he keeps having to run these campaigns and raise money, but now he's in the Depression, right? Now it's really tough. So he decides, you know what, and priests are declining, the vocations are declining, local diocesan vocations are declining, and he doesn't want to compromise the standards of Aquinas, the great academic standards, and so he decides, I got to turn the management, of this school over to somebody else. I got to find a teaching order who can take over this school. And so he talks to several teaching orders, including, incidentally, the Jesuits again. And he makes a deal with the Basilians up in Toronto. They decide they will take over the school, and they will teach, and they'll manage the school and so forth. They won't own the school. The school will still be owned by the bishop, but they'll take over the school. And so they make an agreement. And by the way, all of the verses, chapter and verse of the agreement are in the book. So if you want to know what sort of agreement did the bishop make and what did this involve, that's in there, okay? But one of the most interesting things to me is one of the things the bishop agreed to with the Basilians, because remember, they were coming in and they wanted to get started, and they didn't want a lot of competition and so forth. One of the deals he made with the Basilians was that no other Catholic boys' high school would be started in the Rochester area for a period of 25 years. Okay? Now, for those of you who are math majors, okay, 1937 plus 25 is 1952. Who wants to guess what year McQuaid got started? Oh, well, okay. So Ron says 54. So here's why it's 52, and it's also 54, because McQuaid, when they got started, their building was not done, and so they started with just a freshman class, and then they added more, and by 54 they had a full school going. But in any event, so 25 years. The Anyway, so that was so that story's in there. There's a story of how did the Aquinas alma mater get started, and who wrote that, and what happened behind, and why did it endure, and so there's stories. There's a lot of stories in there. But I hope that and we could just stand here and talk stories. There's sports stories. Oh, I got to tell you one or two sports. You guys want to hear another sport? You want to get out of here? Sports stories? You want a couple stories? Anyway, a couple sports stories. So anyway, Aquinas has a record. They have a basketball record that will never again be broken, ever. Not by high schools, not by colleges, not by professionals, not by amateurs, not by grammar schools. They will never be broken. And the record is this: in 1924, in March of 1924, the Aquinas basketball team went to the Chicago National Invitational Catholic High School tournament, and they shut out another team. Okay, 30-0. Okay, they beat Sioux Falls 30-0 at a year when Aquinas was the shortest team in the conference and Sioux Falls was the tallest. So in basketball, they shut out. Now those were low-scoring games. I understand there were different rules. Ron could tell you but there were different rules at the time. But anyway, they shut out, and not only that, but in the next game, they shut out the other team, which I think was the University of high school from Detroit or something, I'm not sure. But anyway, they shut out they kept the next team from scoring for the first 3 quarters. The other team never scored a basket. Now, one of the players later talked about, he said, our problem in that game was, he said, we showed up and we had white uniforms. We had our away uniforms, he said, and so did the other team. He said, so we spent the first half passing the ball to the other team. He said, once we got the uniform straightened out, he said, it was a better game. It probably was. Harry Wright, I got to talk to you about Harry Wright. So Harry Wright is a quarterback at Notre Dame, right? There's always been, by the way, great relationships between Aquinas and Notre Dame. From the very early stages, Notre Dame took students from Aquinas, accepted Aquinas students. As Jay said, I'm a graduate of Notre Dame back in the days when the requirements were a lot lower than they are today. But there was always a great sort of trade-off, I guess, or relationship between the two schools. In fact, Aquinas started playing football in 1930. The other high schools, East and West, by the way, played in the early 1900s. In 1910, football was discontinued at the high school level in Rochester. And it was discontinued for a couple of reasons. Number one is the kids were getting hurt. They were getting seriously hurt. And the feeling was they just weren't being, drilled in the fundamentals. They were being seriously hurt. The other thing is that students were gambling heavily on the games, that there was apparently some money to be made. And the third reason is, and these stories are all in the book, so if you haven't memorized them, you can. But the other reason was when students played out-of-town games, there were a lot of people who were coming along who were becoming, as they put, disruptive. Some of us call this drunk and disorderly. But anyway, so they decided to discontinue high school football in Rochester. So there's no high school football between 1910 and 1930. Along comes a guy by the name of Father Grady, and he's the principal of Aquinas, and he turns out to be he's a highly educated person, and he teaches summer school at Notre Dame. He goes out to South Bend, Indiana, and he teaches summer school at Notre Dame, where he becomes really good friends with the Rockney family. Okay, this is the late 1920s. He becomes very good friends with the Rockney family, and anyway, so he discovers what football meant to Notre Dame, which was money. Okay, and I'm I know a little bit about Notre Dame history. Some of you won't believe this, but in 1900, Notre Dame's total cash on hand was a little over $5. Okay, after Knute Rockne got finished coaching at Notre Dame, their cash on hand was a little over $20 million, or anyways, a lot of money. Father Grady comes back here and he goes, we could use some money. maybe we could start football. So he starts football in 1930. Okay, now obviously it never paid for Aquinas like it paid at Notre Dame, but he starts football in 1930, and they play one game that year, and they lose to Albion by I think a touchdown, maybe 13-6 or 7, something like that. Next year they go undefeated, and they decide, you know what, football's here to stay. So football's been here to stay. Along comes a guy named Father Carter, whose name means something to you. He's in the mid-40s. He's a young priest. He decides, Aquinas could play on a national stage. Wouldn't this be fun if we played on a national stage? But which is to say with national recognition. But if we're going to do that, we need to get some great coach. We need to get a great coach in here, okay? And so what he decides to do is to recruit nationally. He calls Frank Leahy, who's the coach at Notre Dame. Frank Leahy says, you know what, I had this young quarterback who played for me and has since gone into the Marines and whatnot, but his name's Harry Wright. And so anyway, Father Carter hires Harry Wright. Harry Wright comes in, coaches Aquinas for 3 years. And anyway, but one of my favorite stories about Harry Wright is this. So Aquinas played a lot of other Catholic high schools in those era, right? So one of the things they would do is they'd go to Mass together on Sunday morning before the game. And at Mass, it would be the first opportunity for the teams really to see each other, right? What Harry Wright used to do is he would go to Aquinas, and he'd ask some of the smallest kids in the school to please come to Mass on Sunday, and he'd ask the bigger members of the team to please go to another Mass on Sunday, okay? So in would come the visiting team, and they'd look at Aquinas, they go, give me a break, right? And then the team would show up, of course. So Harry Wright did okay. In fact, Aquinas, a great game that's in here, is that in 1947, Aquinas beat Boys Town. They were still playing at Red Wing Stadium at the time. They beat Boys Town. And at the end of the game, and it was such a great victory that the Aquinas students tore the goalpost out from Red Wing Stadium and carried it in a parade downtown to Rochester to Lowe's Theater on Clinton Avenue, talked their way or barged their way through the ticket taker up on the stage of Lowe's Theater and sang the Aquinas alma mater. So, anyway, great football. So anyway, we could stand here and talk about stories all day. I'm just looking if there's any other story I need to tell you. I think the neat thing about sports at Aquinas, though, is I think Aquinas keeps sports in perspective. I mean, I think they're important. I was just listening to the new president of Notre Dame. His name is Father Bob Dowd. Father Bob Dowd was just inaugurated, or whatever they call that, into Notre Dame a couple of weeks ago. He said something that I thought was really important. He said, if you're a great athlete who wants a great education, you should look at Notre Dame. He said, if you're just a great athlete who wants your name, image, and likeness broadcast all over the place, you know what? Maybe there are other schools you should look at, okay? And I would say the same at Aquinas. If you're a great athlete who wants a great education, this could be the place for you, okay? If you just want your name, image, and likeness known, you know what? Maybe you're not the right fit, right? Because I think one of the reasons that Aquinas has endured, existed, thrived, whatever the right word is, for 100 years, is because they've really kind of stayed true to their values. I mean, they've stayed true to their principles. I mean, unlike Groucho Marx, for example, who once said, "Those are my principles. If you don't like them, I have others." Right? Well, Aquinas doesn't have any others because Aquinas doesn't need any others. And so, I think, what do I think the future of this place is going to be? I think the future is strong. I think we have great leadership, and Dave and Ted and others who are on the staff. I think if you just look at the most recent Landmark magazine, we just got the most recent Landmark. My wife looked at the thing and she goes, "This is not a high school, this is a college." She said, do you see what this school is doing? You know, I mean, you just have to be impressed. I mean, you know, I hope that Aquinas continues to attract people who are serious, students who are serious about getting a great education, you know, teachers and administrators and others who are really serious about making a huge difference, not just teaching, but making a difference in kids' lives. Because, you know, look around and ask yourself, don't we need schools like Aquinas more than ever before? I mean, don't we need their values? Don't we need what the school stands for? And then I think the second question you need to ask yourself is, okay, so how can I be a part of it? Right? That's the reason I wrote the book. Thanks. I'm happy to answer any questions or if you guys, I don't know, how are we running on time? I don't have any. Oh, okay. I mean, just a minute. 1965. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't know you at the time. Yeah, sorry. You're welcome. Yes, sir. Yeah. So let me talk a little bit about that. Let me talk a little bit about the stadium because you want to know the complete history of Aquinas Stadium. It's in there. And so Aquinas, in kind of your dad's era, decided to play on a national stage, right? They decided to play schools from Detroit and schools, you know, Midwest, and you know, they played a little school from Port Arthur, Texas, who had 80 boys in the school, 60 of whom played football. Okay, they came up on their own charter plane back in those days. Okay, so they played some schools that had money. All right. Now the other thing is, and any of you who follow college football know this, teams pay each other to play each other. Okay, so you know, I mean, Notre Dame plays Northern Illinois on. Well, maybe let's not talk about that, but oh, okay. I'm sorry. So you know, I was talking to Joby this morning. He was talking about Bowling Green playing some school and paying them, I know, $1 million or whatever to come in. Now they make the money back. Don't worry about that. But the point is, it costs schools money to play these big teams. So you want to play Boys Town, you got to fly Boys Town in or bring Boys Town in. Okay, so pretty soon that got expensive. Okay, so that's sort of one of the realities. But at the same time, Aquinas decided, you know what, if we want to play these big teams, we're going to have to build a stadium. So they built a stadium, okay? And the problem is, I don't want to say the problem, maybe the limitation is, and Dave could explain this to you much more, because of what Aquinas is, because of the, quote, the tax brackets they're in and the restrictions they have because they are a school and not, for example, a publicly traded company or whatever, okay? They can only use their assets for certain functions, okay? So the problem is You know, Aquinas has this wonderful stadium, right, that seats 25,000 people over on the corner of Ridgeway Avenue. By the way, the original plan was to build it over near where McQuaid is now built. But in any event, so they built this stadium over there that they can only use for certain functions because of the tax limitations, because they're a high school, okay, because they're a Catholic high school, I should say, okay? So consequently, you think, well, why don't they rent it out? Why don't they rent it out for concerts? Why don't they rent it out for these big functions? Why don't they rent it out? Turns out they can't, okay? They're limited by their requirements as a high school. So they can only do so many things with it. So imagine, you got a 25,000 seat stadium that's sitting over there that you can't use, you can't make money from. What are you going to do? And at the same time, you got a building here that's, you know, in the 1950s is, you know, 25 years old and, you know, is leaking money. You got to start setting some priorities, okay? So eventually they had to sell the stadium. Now, did they overemphasize football at the time? I don't know. I wasn't there. You know, my feeling from the reading of the yearbooks and so forth is they really kept it in perspective. I think, yeah, they were playing on a national stage, but now they could also do some things. Let me just talk to you about one other thing. Are you guys all right with these stories? I mean, I don't want to, you know, anyway. So at the time, there was another rule, and this is what upset the local high schools, by the way. This is why some of the local high schools did not want to play Aquinas in football, is because there was a rule in New York State that a kid could come to high school for an extra year or even two, providing they didn't turn 20 years old at beginning of September. I'm seeing Ron nod, so I think my numbers are right. I was a liberal arts major, so so I sometimes get numbers wrong. But anyway, they could come to a high school. Maybe if I sit at the stage. Can you still hear me? Anyway, they could come to high school for another year or two, and they could, of course, play sports or do whatever. As kind of college prep. And so Notre Dame sent students to Aquinas in those years, and the coach, Harry Wright, and then following that with Mickey Connolly, who also played for Frank Leahy, but not at Notre Dame, at Boston College, wherever Frank Leahy coached after Notre Dame. Anyway, they would send Notre Dame students or students who wanted to go to Notre Dame, were signed up for Notre Dame, who were also really good at football, to Aquinas, and they'd play for the Aquinas team. So public high school said, unfair competition, we're not going to do that. So yeah, did Aquinas have some strong teams? They had some strong teams. I don't know, is that an answer to your question, or is that just me talking? I don't know. I mean, it's... Okay. Okay, yes. All right, so what happened is back in the late 1800s, Bishop McQuaid, who was a big supporter of the Sisters of St. Joseph for reasons we've just talked about, they reported to him, and he convinced them to buy some land. And the land they bought was a parcel of land. It was called the Pritchard Estate, and it extended from Lake Avenue a little bit north of where Nazareth Academy built. Nazareth Academy built on a plot of land that was owned by a company that offered what was called the water cure in Rochester, by the way. Whatever was wrong with you, they had this water cure where you drank enormous amounts of water and you sat in cold water and stuff. Rochester had 2 water cure centers before they had a permanent hospital, by the way, so it shows you the nuttiness back then. And anyway, so the nuns brought this plot of land called the Pritchard Estate, extended from Lake Avenue, what's now Lake Avenue, to the railroad tracks out back. I'm maybe pointing in the wrong direction, but anyway, and was kind of north of Augustine Street, and extended down to maybe Seneca Park, where I don't know what those streets are down. But anyway, it was a plot of land. What they did is they divided the land into 2 sections. They divided roughly at Dewey Avenue. And so between Lake Avenue and Dewey Avenue, they sold off those lots to develop streets and stuff, okay? And they kept the plot of land between Dewey Avenue and the railroad tracks. They built what's called 402 Augustine, what was called 402 Augustine Street. Those of you who've been here for a long time, that was the original Mother House. It was the site of Nazareth College for a while. Eventually became the Basilian residence, but they built that. But they had this land, okay? When the bishop was looking for land, he knew one thing: he didn't want to be in downtown Rochester because it was getting really closed in with manufacturing. Kodak had a ton of companies a ton of buildings downtown. And anyway, so what they did is they bought the land from the nuns for Aquinas, from the sisters. They did not buy it from the nuns. I want you to know that, okay? Wow. Whew. That's it. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. There's some Mickey Connolly stories in there, yeah. Yeah. Mickey was followed Harry Wright. Yeah, there's a connection, yeah. Yes. Yeah, so a couple of things, and number one is back when Aquinas, I said there's stories of enduring traditions in here, right? And one of the traditions is sports. Of course, we've talked a lot about sports, but music is another one. Music has been here for a long, long, long time, okay? Back when Aquinas was trying to get a band started, George Eastman, who was the founder of Eastman Kodak Company, donated all the instruments for Aquinas, okay? And there was another campaign where Kodak was the first donor, and I want to say they donated $250,000 to something, but I don't remember exactly what that was. But they were, a contributor. I mean, one of the things was back in those days, Cathedral High School was surrounded by Kodak. I mean, that's where a lot of Kodak manufacturing was, Kodak Tower and so forth. In fact, Kodak eventually bought St. Patrick's Cathedral and Grammar School to tore it all down and to build on there. And that was a decision, by the way, the Pope had to make because of the fact that it was a cathedral. And that story's in there. But in any event, so one of the reasons Aquinas was started is because of companies like Kodak had the need for young people who were trained in business skills. So yeah, there were some. I mean, it wasn't Kodak never bought Aquinas or. Okay, yes, I'm sorry. Is it?
Since I believe you were a student here at the time, did you mention in your book the national championship that Aquinas won?
The national The what?
The national debating championship.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I talked to Bob Craig who lives in Arizona or something. Part of my problem is, right, I talked to some of these people, had great conversations, great emails and so forth, and I remember I haven't seen Bob Craig since I wouldn't know him if he sat here. But he was a friend in high school, and yes, we talked about the fact that they went and won the national debating championship in 1990, and they had to. By the way, they had to get excused from some exams in order to be able to participate in that. One quick story about debating. Huh? Class of 65. Yeah, my big memory of the class being at Aquinas at the time is I was a drummer in a rock band. I think everybody was in a rock band back in those days. But I was a drummer, and we were playing on stage for a pep rally on November 22nd, 1963. And the pep rally ended with Father Sheehy coming on stage saying, "I just got a telegram from Dallas. Your president's been shot." So, my big memory, I mean, everybody remembers where they were on that day, right? I was here.
So, I'm not going to let Bob tell more stories because I think about it.
Oh. It's a donation to Aquinas. And I'd be happy to sign it, by the way.